If you had to pick a whiskey to represent each of the Scotch Whisky Regions, what whiskey would you choose? That's exactly the question I have to answer today, as I've been challenged by Phil from First Fill Whiskey to do just that. My name is Matt. This is Whiskey on the West Coast. This Whiskey Region Challenge was started by Jeff from Jeff Whiskey. If you're not familiar with Jeff, he's the guy with fantastic taste in shirts and even better taste in whiskey. He has a fantastic WhiskeyTube channel, so if you haven't already, go check Jeff out after this video. Thank you to Phil for challenging me to this Whiskey Region Challenge. Phil is a whiskey tuber located in New Zealand who has a wonderfully informative WhiskeyTube channel, but also just a really gorgeous and well presented WhiskeyTube channel. Probably the best, if not one of the best out there. So I can't fathom how you found my channel without first coming across Phil's, but if you haven't, make sure to check him out after this video as well. My little spin on the Whiskey Region Challenge here is going to be a little bit different than some of the other whiskey tubers have done so far. I'm going to be going ahead and I'm going to be naming a whiskey that I think is kind of a quintessential representative of each of these regions. I'm also going to go ahead and tell you what my pick right now would be for my favorite representative from these regions, and stick around till the end of the video when I'll give you an honorable mention for each of these regions for a couple of different reasons. Sometimes it might be because some of these might be very hard to get. Others are just because I think there's some really good value picks or something that's a bit off profile for the region. So stick around till the end. Let's start with the Highlands. The Highlands Single Malt region really represents almost like a rugged yet refined style of whiskey to me. And I tend to associate with ex-bourbon maturation, waxy, sometimes coastal whiskeys with the lightest trace of peat. For me, the quintessential representative of a Highland Single Malt Scotch Whisky would be this one right here. And that would be the Clynelish 14-year-old Single Malt Scotch Whisky. It's a coastal Highland whiskey. It's 46% ABV, one of the few from Diageo that is, but it has that like waxy dessert malt, orchard fruit, just classic Highland profile. I love this whiskey. It's something I always want to keep on the shelf. It's one of the best things I think Diageo makes. Now, my pick overall right now for my favorite Highland single malt that I think kind of fits more or less into the actual classification of this region would be this one here. And that would be the old Pulteney 18-year-old Highland Single Malt Scotch Whisky. This is another coastal Highland, even further north than Clynelish. And for me, it's citrus, it's sea salt, it's apple, with a bit of chocolate and spice because it is mixed maturation. It goes through a finishing period in sherry casks. I love this whiskey. It is a beautiful representative of the Highland style. Next up, we got the Lowland region, and for Lowland single malts, they kind of represent to me a light, clean, approachable, grassy, oftentimes floral, and just fruity, approachable whiskey. It's one of the fastest growing whiskey regions right now, and for a quintessential pick, I would go to something that's readily available on almost every whiskey market, and that's going to be the Glenkinchie 12-year-old from Diageo. It's bottled at 43% ABV. It's a floral, grassy, citrus forward whiskey. It's not too expensive, and again, widely available. That is one that I would say I kind of think to first, along with like Auchentoshan, but we're gonna go with the Glenkinchie 12. My pick right now for what I would be drinking if I wanted something from the Lowlands is gonna be from one of those new distilleries in the Lowlands, and that's gonna be from the Daftmill distillery. It's gonna be Daftmill 15-year-old cask strength. And why? Because it's bright, it's fresh, floral, fruity, and waxy, as well as has a bunch of lovely dessert tones to it. It is everything I would love in a Lowland whiskey, and I do love. I do have a bottle of this. It's packed away right now, but it just really is. It just takes everything that one could love about Lowland whiskey and cranks it up a notch. It's a fantastic whiskey. Now we're heading to the space side, and the space side for me is often associated with the use of sherry casks to age and mature the whiskeys. And for that, the flavor profile is usually like dried fruits, chocolate, spice, ginger, these sorts of things. The quintessential, vastly and widely available whiskey that I oftentimes associate with the space side would be the Macallan 12-year-old Sherry Oak. The Sherry Oak specifically because they seem to use more sherry casks, and as it being a space side and highlighting it for that reason, I would suggest the sherry oak version of the 12-year-old as opposed to the double or triple cask. It is a whiskey that I associate with that, like those dried fruits, those spice, orange, ginger flavors. It is, again, something that I think most single malt Scotch whiskey drinkers are familiar with early on in their whiskey journey. And I flirted with putting Glenfarclas 15 in this spot instead, but I just felt like, really, if there's one whiskey that pops up first for the space side, it's going to be the Macallan 12 Sherry Oak. Even though they're a Highlands single malt, they're a space side whiskey, and they like to be known as a space side whiskey. It's really confusing, but the River Spey runs through their estate, so I'm going to stick with it being a space side whiskey. My pick for what I would drink from the space side right now, if I was picking something off my shelf, that would be the Tamdhu 15-year-old space side single malt Scotch whiskey. I think it's a beautiful whiskey. It really takes all those things that we talk about Macallan doing, and now seems to do them even better. That might be because it's bottled at 46% ABV, it's non-chill filtered and natural color, as opposed to the Macallan is chill filtered and it's bottled, again, 3% lower at 43% ABV. I think this Tamdhu 15, just dried fruit, chocolate, figs, raisins, spice, leather, tobacco, really, it just does such a lovely job. I really love this whiskey. That's going to be my pick for a space side. Now we're taking a trip down to the wee tune. We're talking about Campbelltown single malt whiskeys. And to me, Campbelltown whiskeys are all about fruity, industrial, funky, and coastal drams. For me, there is one particular whiskey that absolutely has to be mentioned as the quintessential Campbelltown single malt. And that's obviously going to be the Springbank 10-year-old single malt Scotch whisky. This whiskey, typically associated with 60% ex-bourbon and 40% sherry cask maturation, 46% ABV, non-chill filtered, natural color. Just like a fruity, funky, industrial, lightly peaty, wonderful and miraculous whiskey. I love it. I would never want to be without it. Most of you will be very familiar with this whiskey. My pick for what I would personally choose, more than anything though, would be this one right here, which is the Springbank 12-year-old cask strength. This is the 2021 edition that was 100% ex-bourbon, and I think that ex-bourbon maturation just really lets that Springbank profile shine through like nothing else. It really kicks the volume up to 11 on the Springbank profile. I love this whiskey. These two whiskeys here are really one of the reasons why we're doing the honorable mentions at the end, because I know they're hard to get. They're hard for me to get, which I'm guessing means they're also hard for you to get. So I'm going to have a different Campbelltown single malt whiskey to recommend in the honorable mentions section at the end of this video. Now we're going to go island hopping. We're going to be talking about island single malt Scotch whiskies. Now the Islands isn't technically its own region. It's actually included in the Highlands. However, I do think it should be considered on its own at this point. That's because there is just such a difference between Highland single malt whiskeys and the Islands. The Islands has quite a range of flavors and of characteristics and profiles. But I think in my mind, island whiskeys are oftentimes rugged, coastal, typically peat influenced whiskeys, though not always, especially with like Isle of Arran versus either like say Highland Park or others. However, there's so much variety. It really just is a really unique whiskey region in and of itself. My quintessential pick for the Islands is going to be the Talisker 10-year-old at 45.8% ABV. It's colored, it's chill filtered because of Diageo things. However, it is a classic. It is from the classic malts of Scotland range. Cracked pepper, orange, distant peat, and smoke, and then sea spray. Really just like one of the whiskeys that is near and dear to my heart, and I would keep on my shelf at all times if it wasn't for Diageo doing Diageo things and charging $120 Canadian for a bottle in my market. That's the reason why I don't have a bottle of that on my shelf right now. I'd love for that to change. However, my pick currently for what I'd be reaching for from the Islands on my shelf would be the Ledaig 18-year-old single malt Scotch whiskey. It's probably the best value, heavily peated 18-year-old whiskey out there right now. It's a fantastic value, heavily peated whiskey, cheesy, funky, kind of farmy peat, kind of a dirty profile and style, but still really fruity, really sweet from the quality of the casks. I imagine they're using a lot of first fill casks, ex-bourbon for I believe the first 16 years, 2 years in sherry casks. It's just a lovely, lovely whiskey. Even if you can't find the 18, the 10-year-old is fantastic too. But my pick, Ledaig 18-year-old Single Malt Island Scotch Whisky. Our last stop in the whiskey regions is going to be the Isle of Islay, and it's one of my favorites. It is all about the heavily peated whiskeys in this region. Some distilleries do make unpeated whiskeys, two most notably. However, it's all about the peat. It's all about the peat smoke and these really smoky, peaty whiskeys. For me, the quintessential Islay whiskey, the one that's turned more people on to heavily peated whiskeys than probably any other, is gonna be the Lagavulin 16-year-old single malt Scotch whiskey. It's 43% ABV, it's chill filtered, it is colored. However, it just has that classic Islay profile of just like heavy peat, rich, leathery peat smoke, dark fruits, the sherry notes come through. There's like this steak char vibe, a little bit of like cracked pepper. It's actually really a lovely whiskey and one I'd own more often if it wasn't so expensive to purchase. But I think this is the one that most people, when you ask them to name just one Islay whiskey, they're probably going to name Lagavulin 16 most of the time. However, my pick is going to be a Islay whiskey that's more Islay than any of the Islay whiskeys. And that's going to be this one right here. That is the Kilchoman 100% Islay Single Malt Scotch Whisky. This one's the 10th edition. I've talked about it on the channel a few times. However, the reason why this is more Islay than anything else is because this is the only whiskey that every step of the process is done on Islay. From the peat being harvested only on Islay from Loch Gorm, from being floor malted on Islay, from the barley being grown on farms at the Kilchoman distillery farms on Islay. It's bottled on Islay. It is everything about it is Islay, and it's a beautiful whiskey. It's honestly, it isn't as heavily peated as other Islay whiskeys, typically around 20 phenol parts per million, but it's a gorgeous profile and absolutely one of my favorites. The Kilchoman 100% Islay is a can't miss whiskey for any Islay fan. Before we get to the honorable mentions, I just want to thank you guys for watching this far into the video. Thank you for supporting the channel by watching this video, by commenting on the videos, and thank you so much to my Patreon subscribers and my Patreon members. I really do appreciate you guys supporting in such a huge way. Leave a comment down below. What would be your picks for whiskey for each one of these Scotch whisky regions, or what you think a quintessential representative would be for these regions? I have to challenge somebody with this challenge being done. And so I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to challenge John, the whiskey neighbor in Alberta. I'm going to challenge John, Just Whiskey, over in Massachusetts, I think, at least on the East Coast of the United States. And we're also going to challenge Rob, Whiskey in the Six, out there in Toronto. And then Tyler, Seaway Whiskey Wire. You guys have all been challenged. Let's see your lists. Let's see what you would pick for these Scotch Whisky Region Challenge. All right, guys, honorable mentions. For the main list, I only included official bottlings. For the honorable mentions, I am going to allow independent bottlings to be part of it. And we're going to talk first about the Highlands here. I want to give a shout out to Ardmore independent bottlings, particularly those before 2001, before they switched from their direct fire coal-fired stills. Independently bottled Ardmore, even after that date, is delicious. I really love the profile. If you like the profile of something like Ledaig, I think that you would enjoy Ardmore as well. It is more peated than most Highlands would be, but I really love the profile. So honorable mention, Ardmore independent bottlings. They're usually a great price too, because people are kind of sleeping on them a bit. I think they're a great thing to pick up. Honorable mention for the Lowlands, because it's off profile, I'd say, that typically than other Lowlands. It does have some of the aspects of Lowland whiskeys, but it just goes kind of funky and cheesy in a different way, in a lactic sort of way. So my honorable mention is going to be this Bladnoch 11-year-old Lowland single malt Scotch whiskey. It's 46.7% ABV, non-chill filtered, natural color. This one is ex-bourbon cask maturation as well as California red wine maturation. I do prefer the 10-year-old. However, this one is like cheesy, yogurt, creamy, butterscotch vibes, along with this like lactic, almost like Tim Hortons sour cream glazed donut tasting note. I really love this bottle. It's actually a really cool bottle, and it's a beautiful bottle too to have on the shelf. So Bladnoch 11 is going to get my vote for honorable mention here. In the space side, I'm going to give my honorable mention to a whiskey that is actually peated, and that's the reason why I didn't mention it as my pick or quintessential. And I think it's going to go to the Ben Romick 15-year-old Speyside Single Malt Scotch Whisky, bottled up 43%. It is natural color, but it is chill filtered because it's at that 43% mark. But I think it's a sweet spot in the Ben Romick age statement range, and just lovely addition of peat with exclusively first fill casks. It's just a lovely whiskey. I love Ben Romick, as you guys know. Ben Romick 10, Ben Romick 15, both fantastic whiskeys along with their cask strength and contrast range. Campbelltown, I wanted to give you guys a different whiskey that's not from the Springbank or Glengyle distillery, and my honorable mention this time is actually going to be the Glen Scotia 15-year-old. Now, the Glen Scotia 15-year-old is bottled at 46% ABV. It's a lovely whiskey. It's actually really well distributed. It seems to be available in a lot of different markets and at a really reasonable price. Usually in and around $100 Canadian is what I'm seeing it at. Vanilla, spice, lots of fruits, and some coastal notes, and typically just like a really good value. I really enjoy this whiskey, and it should be a lot easier to find than Springbank 10 or 12 cask strength. I hope you guys forgive me for including those on the list. I just had to be true to what I thought with them. Islands. I think one of the greatest values in Scotch whiskey, and for both for performance and actually like the how good the whiskey is, plus the actual cost you're paying, is going to be Secret Orkney, or like just independently bottled Highland Parks under the Secret Orkney or an Orkney range. There's a ton of them. There's a ton of them from bottlers like Single Malt Scotland range, from Signatory, from 80 Rattray, on and on and on. It feels like everybody, North Star, everybody has their own version of a Secret Orkney or Orkney malt. I love them. I love to collect them. They're one of my favorite profiles because it's that lightly peated and almost like floral heather sort of peat, along with oftentimes either a sherry or a beautiful ex-bourbon combination, which can go almost tropical at times. I really love Highland Park in both those cask types. It's just a beautiful whiskey. So for me, independently bottled Secret Orkneys are the way to go for the islands. And then for Islay, my honorable mention for Islay is actually going to be a whiskey that, if I want just like a peat bomb to share with people, that definitely skews towards the medicinal side of peat, that uses Islay peat as part of its process, I'm going to be pulling out Laphroaig 10 cask strength. This batch is 57.9% ABV. This is batch 13. This is just like cranking up the volume on everything medicinal, coastal, band-aid, seaweed, iodine, and just huge plumes of smoke, as well as some fruit and malt notes as well. But really the peat and the medicinal notes are really the star of the show. I love Laphroaig, and this is probably one of the best bottlings you can get from Laphroaig on a regular basis for a good price. Those are my honorable mentions, guys. Thank you so much for joining me on this video. Again, remember to like, share, and subscribe for more in the future. And until next time, from the West Coast, this is Whiskey on the West Coast.